Hi, and welcome to Masters of Product Marketing. This session, we're going to talk about developer marketing, in particular, how developer marketing is marketing without marketing, but it's still marketing. So let's jump right into the agenda for today. First, we'll talk about who am I, a little bit of background on myself and stuff I've done in my career and stuff I'm interested in. Quick level set on developers, so we all know who we're talking about. Quick level set on marketing, just to make sure I know we're all product marketing masters and aspiring masters at that, but I want to make sure we're all talking about the same things. And then we're going to really dig into the heart of it. Why market to developers? Why are they so important? How do they help organizations? What are the ways? And then what's different or hard about developer marketing versus, marketing to other personas? What works? And we'll take a few examples of who's doing it well. So with that, let's jump into the presentation. So my name is John Rooney. I am the Senior Vice President of Product and Solutions Marketing at New Relic. Been at New Relic for about a year now, but been in the space, enterprise software, for a long time. Spent a number of years at Splunk, ran marketing at a data science startup called Domino Data Lab. Was at Microsoft for years, started my career at Andersen Consulting, so that was so long ago when Accenture was called Andersen Consulting, and then spent a lot of the aughts at startups, hence the foosball table. Long gone, but some fun memories. And then most importantly about me, I'm a native Philadelphian, so you'll see this painting of the Philly skyline, Philly fanatic, Sixers great Allen Iverson, and believe it or not, for not the last time, Daryl Hall and John Oates, the great Hall and Oates combo. So let's quick level set on developers. Who are these developers? So what are their jobs in organizations? We've all talked about and heard about how software is eating the world and digital transformation. Well, what role do developers play and who are they? Well, developers are the people at an organization who are responsible for building, deploying, and increasingly today, maintaining or operating softwares, products, and services that drive the business. To get a good sense of who they are demographically, we are all unbelievably fortunate to live in a world where Mike Judge decided to make Silicon Valley. So if you think about a character like Carla or Dinesh, it's a pretty good example, a pretty fun way to get a sense into sort of the firmographics and the mindset and the preferences of developers. So that's the quick level set on developers. Let's talk about marketing. What do we do in marketing? Well, we think about two primary things academically. We create awareness and we drive demand. We want people to hear about the things, the services, the products that our organizations offer, and we want them to want it and start to figure out, how do I get this? How do I learn more? How do I try it out? There's the old adage, which I think there's some always helpful truth in the sense that at the end of the day, the job of marketing is to make sales jobs easier. So we'll swing back and see how that impacts in terms of developer marketing. But then again, we're all product marketers here. We know at the end of the day, it's a comms job. We are trying to communicate some concepts, some ideas, even if they tend to be very technical for technical users, which is the case with developers. So quick level set on developers, quick level set on marketing. So then why market to developers? I think 10, 20, 15 years ago, it was a lot less common. Developers, in terms of inside an organization, were users. They tended to not really make much of a decision. There wasn't much of a market for developer tools in and of itself. It wasn't really as important. Stephen O'Grady, who started a analyst firm called RedMonk, wrote a really great important book, almost maybe 10 years ago now, called The New Kingmakers. There's some really great stuff in that book. I will, kind of paraphrase a few of them. Number one, why market to developers? Developers build on your platform to increase its value. This has sort of been present in the software industry and technology in a lot of different places, a lot of different industries for decades. So if you think about operating systems and when the PC really started growing up in the 90s, that virtuous cycle, which is you want the most developers to target your platform, so the most apps on top of that platform, which will attract the most users, which will attract the most developers to build the most apps. That virtuous cycle, which is sort of at the foundation of software, whether we're talking about enterprise or consumer, is really important. So developers became at the heart of that, and companies like Microsoft and Apple in the 90s really built up on that. So that's when you are a platform in and of itself, and there are ways to do that well, and there's ways to not do it well. If you look at what Facebook and Twitter has done to sort of really rub some of the developer community the wrong way and not really build up the platform from an extensibility standpoint is an example of how that's not always working for everybody. Secondarily, what do developers do is they integrate with your services to extend reach. So maybe you're offering your products, your service isn't a platform in and of itself, but developers in building applications increasingly today, you hear the term like composite applications from various places and hitting a bunch of API calls. You want to make sure that developers both know how and have a reason to. There's value proposition for developer to even integrate into your business. So think about a company like Stripe from a financial services and payment standpoint. That's now this really essential service that developers integrate into all sorts of applications that, and we'll talk about Stripe in a little bit. Stripe knows that building out that awareness and demand for their services for developers is super important to the health of their business. So those are the two kind of platform and services way of looking at developers. Developers increasingly, and I've again seen this a lot in enterprise software, they influence major tech investments. And that may be investments in terms of public cloud provider, in some cases hardware stacks, in some cases SaaS offerings. And even if they don't necessarily hold the purse in terms of the team, the organization that has the budget, they have a tremendous amount of influence. And that's something that O'Grady talks about a lot in the new Kingmakers. So making sure that developers take a look at an offering, even if it's not something that they're directly going to use to do their jobs, to say, how extensible is it? What does support look like? What does documentation look like? Is there an ecosystem of other developers interacting and working with this product? Becomes really important. I mean, look at the work that Salesforce has done around, first the Heroku acquisition and then Force and app, whatever it's called today, but it becomes really important and it adds a ton of value to the platform. And again, if you're thinking about, well, I'm going to buy a SaaS offering, you would think, oh, well, what do developers really have to do with that? That's abstracted away. Well, no, you think about extensibility, you think about interaction points. So really important. And fourth and finally, like in my case, both at Splunk and now at New Relic, and certainly before at Microsoft, are developers using your tools, your software, your offering to help them do their jobs, in terms to help them build, deploy, or operate software. It's a much smaller use case compared to the rest of them, but it is really important, and it's actually been a lot of the anchoring of my experience here. All right, so what's different or hard about it? I know we've all heard stories about how you can't market to developers. They're too cynical. They can't stand marketing. They're allergic to marketing. I don't think that's necessarily the case. We'll talk about that in the next slide. But let's talk about sort of what's different about it and why that difference may make it look like it's hard. Number one, developers are super busy. They're often focused at the task at hand. And traditionally in most organizations, particularly on the enterprise, they're not necessarily the organization that is chartered with evaluating and purchasing and integrating, enterprise-wide tools or enterprise-wide systems. They are swamped with new technology all the time. I mean, one of the amazing things about the software industry and really every industry around digital transformation in the last 20 years is how quickly and how much the technology has changed, whether we're talking about storage and storage capacity, whether we're talking about the availability of compute, whether we're talking about massive abstractions and how web services work and different frameworks and all this stuff. Part of being a job as a developer today is trying to figure out of the tons of signals that are coming your way, what's useful to you, what's really helpful. So we'll get to that in a second. I mentioned this before. While developers generally aren't buyers, they are key influencers. So if you're running sort of more of a traditional enterprise software motion inside your organization, you think about doing account planning, who has influence, very often, and I've seen it lots of times in my career, where the account team, the AE in particular, is sort of taken a bit surprised by the participation or the influence of developers in an organization. I think that is only going to increase, and I think as product marketers, we need to help our field counterparts to navigate and understand that. And then finally, developers like to think they're immune to marketing. Certainly traditional marketing, things that we'll talk about. But again, if we decompose what we mean by marketing, we decompose what we mean around creating awareness and driving demand, I think we can actually get to a nice place for everybody. All right, so what works? This is an important thing for all of us to understand, or if we're going to really go at this. What are the things that works in developer marketing? So I'll kind of talk around some concepts and some design principles and get into some examples. So the first one is be tangibly, immediately useful. So help developers solve problems. Developers come from organizations where they're constantly either solving a problem that's right in front of them, whether that is fixing a bug or trying to get an app out the door, or potentially even evaluating something larger and more strategic. So as much as you're offering, as much as you as a product marketer can put something in front of them, whether it's very top of the funnel from an awareness standpoint, or something more for consideration, like during a POC or some evaluation period, be really useful in ways that developers can get hands-on with what they're talking about. If it is, you're able to integrate your service via an API, let people try that. Let people, reduce all of the friction. So it says here, without a reg wall, the traditional, tactics around, well, we're going to put a white paper behind a reg wall and then have a webinar and then we'll lead score based on that. We'll talk about that in a second. No, make sure that developers get access to all the things so they can see and feel the things for themselves. And that is, an important thing that I think we can all do is help with product marketers. Along the same lines, make sure that there's fast, free access to whatever it is you're offering. Making sure, to talk about something is one thing, maybe to show a demo is another thing, but really the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the experience that a developer has working with that organization. That being said, think about the value proposition in terms of what's in it for developers, and make sure that you communicate that and see that holistically, right? So when we talk about being useful, that's not just, hey, we're able to solve this task, but also if I'm a developer, I have a very valuable skill set. I don't have a lot of time. Where I'm investing my time is really important. So you want to make sure that the part of that value proposition, for example, if you're a platform and you want people to build apps on top of your platform and monetize it, show the reach, show the ability to monetize that. That is, a huge part of the success that Apple's had around iOS and that platform. Even if you talk to developers in the early days, Objective-C was tough to deal with. People didn't really like Xcode, but the business sense was there. The business case was there in terms of users and market opportunity. So don't lose sight of that. Developers do not as well. Particularly kind of independent developers that are trying to figure out which platform should I build on in order to build my business. And there are all sorts of companies that have been really successful there, but you can't lose sight of that fact around what's in it for the developer. Have a unique voice that's reflected across the brand. And this is where I think the notion that developers are immune to marketing, I think is untrue. I think they may have different preferences or taste, or may manifest differently than it would for other personas, particularly in the enterprise. But having a voice, having a brand, this logo over here that says Sports Hack Day is, a friend of mine and I put together a hackathon years ago up in Seattle. And it was, a few different companies. It wasn't specific to any one vendor. It wasn't specific really to any one technology. The theme was really around sports and APIs and integrating stuff. But we knew it was really important for us to have a visual identity for the brand. We wanted it to be something that was cool and appealed to developers and was sort of nerdy and inside jokey. And I was working with the agency. I was like, I want something that kind of looks like the Motorhead logo, but with tech stuff and also sports. And this is what we came up with, and this was cool. People, wore this on their stuff and put the stickers on their laptop, and all the things that sort of felt like, yep, people are saying this is a cool brand, or this is something visually that reflects well on them, which is, again, what a big part of marketing is and brand identity. Finally, I mentioned this a little bit in terms of what works. Product qualified leads, not marketing qualified leads. Again, the signal in terms of is somebody ready to buy or move on or adopt or activate or whatever term you want to use in terms of the funnel is going to be much different than it is for other buyers. So don't think about, somebody, watched this webinar or, downloaded this white paper. Now let's put them in a BDR SDR queue. And no, I think about, they'll be ready. You should put them in a position where they're ready to buy based on what they're already doing with your products and services. So if they're already seeing value, they're already finding use in your products and services, that's the point to say, okay, well, how do we expand that with those folks? And I think having as much insight, having as much data to that, but also really more that mindset around, I mentioned this before, proofs in the pudding, get people hands on keyboard, get people actually using the thing, and make sure the thing lives up to the claim. And that's really, again, a lot of the heart of developer marketing. All right, so finally, let's talk about who's doing it well. There are a number of organizations, obviously, that have developer marketing programs. Again, it depends a lot on the type of the organization and what their offering is. So let's take a look at a few tactics. So up here in the top left, you'll see a little bit of screenshot from the documentation or docs site at Stripe. I mentioned this earlier about being useful and being helpful to developers as they go to look to solve a problem. Docs are marketing, and docs are product, and docs are critical. That is an area in which developers evaluate either companies or technologies or an open source projects. What does the support look like? What do the docs look like? Again, what does the ecosystem look like? So the better you do not only maintaining this as the notion of a doc site as sort of a repository of knowledge or a system of record for all of the technical information that you need, but also you utilize them in, whether that's blog posts or recipes or whatever you do to put it in front of developers to say, hey, you have this, here's this problem that, is probably relevant to you or could be relevant to you. Here's how to solve it step by step using this documentation. And it could also, include other systems or other technologies, whatever it is, make sure that it's holistic. It's about solving that person's problems versus, just talking about features and functionalities and speeds and feeds of your individual offering. So I think that's one way to think about sort of docs and hands-on recipes and making sure that, again, developers have a path to go do the things for themselves. And that's a very rational, that is a very, being sort of pragmatic way of looking at developers. The flip side of that, to think about more about brand and brand affinity, look at GitHub. Here's someone on Twitter talking about the sort of swag bag that was mailed to them from GitHub. And, it matters. It really matters. I've been to tons of developer conferences over the years, and, people talk, oh, that's a cool sticker, or that's a cool thing here. And, people and programs, Microsoft did this for years. Apple did it for years. Lots of organizations, had the notion of a developer MVP or, whatever program that really wanted to recognize and keep close folks in the ecosystem, folks in the community that were investing heavily. So here's an example of somebody, kind of unsolicited, showing genuine excitement and genuine happiness about the outreach they're getting from GitHub. This is not about solving a specific problem. This is about, hey, here we are. We care about you. GitHub, as I mentioned earlier, there are some companies where what you actually want developers to do is use your product to solve their problems and building stuff. Obviously, GitHub is at the heart of that. But this is a great example of something that's much more emotional, much more sort of traditionally marketing. And think about that, and think about what the voice looks like, and think about sort of what the tone and the feel of all of those things that are created. Another thing that's sort of emotional over here, I mentioned Daryl Hall and John Oates. Hall and Oates, the pop and soul, I guess, duo from my hometown of Philadelphia. So I don't know if folks remember this. This is one of the most brilliant sort of acts of developer marketing I can think of off the top of my head was Twilio. And this is, 8 years ago. So Twilio was a much smaller company than it is now, but they were, from the get-go, developer first, focused on, having a really simple sort of time to value in terms of write a little bit of code, start seeing the things work right away. Well, anyway, somebody in Twilio built this little app where you could dial a phone number, and it was called Call and Oates. And you would using Twilio, you would dial a phone number and start playing a Hall and Oates song. It's kind of goofy. It's kind of silly. It's brilliant. Got Twilio a ton of attention, and it got to show people in a really fun way, oh, here's a thing that I can do and do pretty easily. So that's a good example, I think, of, I think that I imagine, I don't know if the Twilio folks would even think of that as a campaign and we think it was something that was more organic, but it really, I still think about it, and it's been 8 years. And then finally, from a real tangible thing, again, when I talk about the idea of being useful to developers, I can't emphasize enough the value of being useful holistically. So not just on what your particular product does or offering does, but think about it. If I'm a developer and I'm in this general space of wherever you are, what are the things that they care about and they really want to know, and how do you enable them to do that? And I think the large cloud providers, Google, AWS, Microsoft, do a great job of helping educate and train and up-level all sorts of developers around, core key technologies to help build their tool set that's primary before, hey, I can actually use our widget to do this. So here is, I worked with Lawrence Moroney years ago at Microsoft, fantastic guy, fantastic developer advocate, fantastic teacher. Here he is, he's at Google now, just helping people learning about TensorFlow. And if you look him up, he'll talk all about all sorts of data science things. But that notion of, hey, you're a developer, we want to make sure that we're going to help you gain the skills, get the education around core technologies, around core offerings that are more holistically, and goodness will come back. I mentioned earlier, one of our goals in marketing is to help sort of prime, help sales do their job. And I think with developers, it's a little bit harder because it's a little bit less of a direct path. And there's a little bit more of a long game. As you have developers start to get some value, as you start to potentially be a hub for knowledge and learning around developers. I think Puppet did it great for years around sort of DevOps practices. It wasn't just their offering; it was to think about DevOps holistically. So, I think these are examples of companies. I'm not talking about any company that I've worked in, just to be fair, but companies that I think are, have done it and are doing it really well. And I think useful things to think of as product marketers. How do we think about developers? What can we do in our organizations? How can we partner? Either with technical field or PMs or developer advocates or developer evangelists or developer relations folks, whatever you call them inside your organization, to make sure you get these points across. So if you've heard that developers are immune to marketing, it's not true. It's just different. And I think hopefully this conversation, this talk was helpful to you and gave a little bit of taste of it. Again, my name is John Rooney. You can follow me on Twitter. And thanks very much. Thanks everyone at the PMA for inviting me. And have a great rest of your day.